Good afternoon, everyone. As Harry mentioned, my name is Nick, and I am a BIM specialist here at Microsol Resources. Also, as Harry mentioned, I'm an architect by training, so I have a pretty good understanding of most of the issues that everyone faces on a day-to-day basis in the AEC world. So here's our presentation. This is quite a mouthful of a title that we came up with here. Ultimately, my goal really is to demystify some of the tools that we'll be discussing, really, if only to help you get your foot in the door so you can begin to get some useful mileage out of them right away. As we already mentioned, the tools that I'll be talking about here all come as part of your AEC collection. What we're going to cover is not too detailed or complicated at all to use. Most everyone will be able to use some of these tools right off the bat. Now, that's not to say that these aren't complex programs, and you can certainly go down the wormhole on any one of them, but our goal really is to learn some of the workflows that will hopefully make your lives a little bit easier on a day-to-day basis. Our first topic here is going to be FormIt and how it can be used in conjunction with Revit. So FormIt is an early stage modeling tool very similar to like what most people are familiar with in terms of SketchUp. Let's be honest, some designers don't love working in Revit in kind of the conceptual or the schematic design phase, as they feel it can be a little unwieldy that early along in the process. There are a number of tools that people use, probably, like I said, the most popular being SketchUp. Even some in AutoCAD and other programs. However, as anyone who has ever used SketchUp knows, those models have never really translated very well into Revit once ready for documentation. And that's mainly due to the geometries and meshes that don't jive well with Revit all the time. So enter FormIt. And although FormIt has been around for a couple years, it has recently evolved quite considerably and now can be quite useful in the conceptual and schematic design phases. Most importantly, it has native Revit interoperability, so we no longer have a throwaway model from SketchUp or another platform that are either too difficult to import into Revit or so cumbersome that we just have to start over with Revit. So by using Revit and FormIt and Insight together, Insight, which we'll get to here in a little bit, we now have a more comprehensive solution from conceptual design through CDs, which includes easy-to-access energy model analysis through Insight. This image here shows a couple different phases of work that can be done in FormIt, from simple massing, simple massing to even complex rendered images. On the left, we have a massing study with a solar analysis. In the middle is a traditional rendering, can be used in the conceptual design phase. And on the right, we have, a more stylistic hidden line rendering with shadows, some extended edges, and lower, contrast lines, just something a little more interesting to look at sometimes. You can access and present your models anywhere on multiple devices through FormIt 360. And kind of back to the compatibility issues with SketchUp, the two most common ways to import SketchUp into Revit are either by exporting an IFC file from SketchUp and then importing that into Revit, or to create an in-place family in Revit and then use the import CAD command. However, as we already touched on, there are limitations to how Revit treats this data coming in from SketchUp to Revit, and you typically have to do quite a bit of manipulation to kind of make that information usable within Revit. FormIt allows you to open and import SketchUp files as if they were native FormIt files, including layers, groups, components, scenes, materials, all that type of information. And thanks to this, and as we'll touch on a little bit more here briefly, FormIt can be used as a quote-unquote pre-flight tool for preparing SketchUp data to become something more BIM ready in Revit. However, of course, be warned, as the old adage goes, garbage in, garbage out. SketchUp models still need a certain level of cleanliness to successfully get the geometry into Revit, but I'll show you a couple of those tools here to help with that process. So what's new with FormIt? FormIt version 17 was recently released at the end of February of this year, which included upgraded FormIt and an upgraded FormIt and Dynamo experience. There are a good number of updates, but I just want to present a couple of the higher level ones. The first one being the plugin manager, which we'll see in a little bit more detail here in a bit. These are internet-based plugins and can be added and uninstalled as needed. So to the point of FormIt acting as a pre-flight tool for bringing SketchUp into Revit, the plugin manager actually allows you to do a couple of things. There's a couple tools down here: validate and clean tools for SketchUp, or for even for Entourage information, where you can basically fix any issues and get them more BIM ready. So you can use this panel, use these out-of-the-box plugins for that type of stuff. You can also create mesh objects. Here would be that tool. You can do that instantly, and that will basically simplify the different versions of the geometry, and that's great again for complex items that are coming from like Entourage or SketchUp that can then help us import that information into FormIt and then therefore into Revit. There's also a number of other tools in this. Again, you can see here it's called the sample plugin out of the box. So there are a number of other tools that you can be used to help clean up those models and kind of manipulate your FormIt model if you were to be using that as if essentially as if you're using like a SketchUp file or something like that. So let me just exit out of this and just show you briefly. Let me get into FormIt here. Okay, so now one of the things that I mentioned was that there is now a Dynamo plugin within FormIt as well, and Dynamo files are now fully integrated locally inside of FormIt. You simply use the graphs that are baked in, or you can load and then drag and drop and then edit directly in FormIt. You can also access the Dynamo editor from inside FormIt if necessary, and we'll take a look at that here in a second. But I just want to walk through kind of a sample Dynamo graph that's baked in. So what I would do over here, so again, here's my little icon for Dynamo. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you what one of the stairs options that are baked in here. So I would go over here, click on my Bake to FormIt option. I would just drop this in anywhere, and then what I can do, I'll just double click on it, and then it brings up another panel where it says Edit in Dynamo. So when I click that, what you'll see here is it's going to open up the Dynamo editor for us. Just give it a second here to open up. Now you'll see here, I'll give you a view. Now this is the full script or the graph in the Dynamo editor for this particular stair. What I just want to show you, just to give you an idea of how easy it is to use these built-in these baked-in graphs, is I'm just going to change this stair width. I'm just going to kind of embellish it quite a bit and go, let's just say we'll go 24. Close out of this. I'm going to say, yes, I want to save my changes. And as soon as we pop back into FormIt, you see that this stair has now changed to that dimension. I can always, go back in, click Edit Dynamo, go back into the editor, and change that back to the original 6-foot wide setting that we had. I'll just change that. Save again, and I have now popped back to that 6-foot wide stair that came in. So I'll go back to my tool over here. You can see here there's a couple different built-in things here, and I'll just drop a couple of them in here just to see, so we can look at, you can start to drop in and start to model before you even get into Revit some of these different types of things. So I can start to look at louvers. I can create drop in a column grid that I can start to, the same principle applies. So if I were to double click on this, I'd be able to go into the Dynamo editor interface and start to make manipulations there, use these Dynamo graphs that are built in, and then start to, form my model. I can drop in if I want to do some studies on a panel grid system, I can drop this in, and then I can start to manipulate that through entering the different inputs within Dynamo. So you can really see where these tools start to allow you to start accessing parametric design pretty quickly and fairly effortlessly. As I mentioned earlier, importing from SketchUp typically involves a handful of different steps, but with the converter that is built into Revit, it's actually a faster process now. So again, as I mentioned, the two most common ways to import SketchUp into Revit were either by importing an IFC file or using create in-place family in Revit and then using the import CAD command. And again, however, we've discussed that, there's a limitations to how Revit treats this data. Now what we can do is we can actually use the add-in through Revit to make the conversion process much easier and faster. The import FormIt to Revit command adds FormIt models into an existing Revit project, so you can update often from FormIt and then link it directly into Revit. So that that's where we see that traditional, or what has been traditional, kind of workflow of trying to bring a SketchUp model into Revit and not having to start from scratch. Now we can, with the native interoperability between FormIt and Revit, we can work between the two options. The Revit systems families can actually be exported to FormIt if you wanted to use families that you've created in Revit for FormIt models, and you can use the add-in directly in Revit to select a SketchUp file to be converted to a FormIt file. And what that'll basically allow you to then clean it up in FormIt. But it basically you use that option, and it allows you to select one file in a dialog box and tell Revit where to place the converted FormIt file into another folder, and then it basically converts it for you right there in the background. So we just discussed a little bit on how FormIt can be used with Revit. Now we're going to dig in to using Dynamo to help automate the design process a little bit. So, as we all know, there is a lot of information to consider when looking at the design and construction of a building, some of which can be mind-numbing repetitive tasks, and then, of course, add that to being comfortable with the technology associated with performing all those tasks. Fortunately, there are a number of ways to automate Revit, two of the most popular being Dynamo and Revit macros. Both are programming-based, but the difference is that macros are text-based programs, which typically involve understanding program language, whereas Dynamo is more of a visual programming tool and thus more accessible to those of us with that type of a mindset. Now, a large portion of the Dynamo community is focused on how visual scripting can be used for computational designing and complex form finding. There is a large contingent using visual scripting to actually bridge the gaps in everyday workflow using Revit. Dynamo can be used for many things, but I want to focus mostly on automating tasks here today. We all know that data is the key to Revit, the I in BIM, but getting that data isn't always the easiest. Most of us know how to create schedules, but sometimes they are limited to what we can do with them. We'd like to be able to sometimes manage other information or calculate specific values that isn't necessarily lending itself very well to Revit. So Revit has certainly improved, but it can fall short sometimes with some of the more complex data-specific tasks that we want to do, namely with scheduling and the like. So Dynamo actually can make this process easier. For example, we can use graphs to export data to Excel. Then we can modify that information in Excel as needed, and then we can actually use another graph to import that data back into the Revit model. There's a lot that is repetitive. I think I mentioned that before. There's a lot that's repetitive that we do in Revit. Doing something once in Revit is pretty simple, but doing it over and over and over again, 10, 20, 50 times can take up quite a bit of time. However, Dynamo can actually help us with that, and I'll show a couple graphs here shortly. Some of the examples would be, renumbering a sequence of sheets, flipping grid heads, batch inserting families, adding revisions to multiple sheets, changing text from upper to lowercase, vice versa. There's a ton of information out there and a ton of different options that we can use. Of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Dynamo is also, of course, a powerful design tool, though we won't really be covering that in this presentation. But by encoding your design rules into Dynamo through the Dynamo editor that we looked at earlier, it's possible to generate numerous design options rather quickly. If you're interested in exploring that type of opportunity with Dynamo, I would recommend first looking at Project Refinery from Autodesk. It's a generative design tool that does just that. If you just did a search for Project Refinery Autodesk, you'd be able to find that. You can use it to do a number of things. There's people that are testing it for different glazing patterns on a curtain wall, the twisting shaped towers that we see in some of the the pretty renderings, and like all those types of things. Is all what you can do from a design perspective. Like I said, I'm here to I would like to focus on more the kind of the automation of Dynamo, but it can do so many things. We're just going to be at the tip of the iceberg today here. This image on the screen here, I'm showing this because this is the type of visualization that kind of scares people off from Dynamo. A lot of people look at this and say, I don't have the time to to learn how to do that, how to create those graphs and those scripts. That being said, I still wanted to break down Dynamo just a little bit before showing you how you can use it without even actually having to really even worry about creating graphs or editing them. This is kind of Dynamo 101 in a more digestible image. So how this works is basically we have each node performs a specific task. Nodes have inputs and outputs, and the output from one node is connected to the inputs of another using wires here. And the program or the graph flows from one node through the network of wires, resulting in a graphic representation of the steps required to achieve the desired output. Like I said, the previous image can be a little terrifying, and we saw something similar when we looked at the Dynamo editor a little earlier. But the good news is that you don't even have to be able to create graphs in Dynamo to use it. Although, of course, part of the reason why I want to cover this, it is helpful to understand the basics, so you can edit some of those graphs if it's necessary. You may pull a bunch of, pull some graphs that you find on the internet and download them, and they need to be tweaked a little bit. So it's useful to at least have a cursory understanding of how to use those editors. And mainly the reason why we don't have to know the most detailed information on Dynamo and be able to be a whiz at the editor is because there's actually a couple different ways to use Dynamo. One of which you don't even need to use the Dynamo editor. Again, which is what we just saw when we were looking in FormIt. And as I mentioned, there's a ton of resources for graphs and nodes that you can grab and just use by just searching the internet. The Dynamo community is huge. So there's actually 3 typical ways to use Dynamo. There's the standalone Dynamo Studio, which is in the AC collection that you saw in one of the slides that Harry presented. That is similar to what we saw when we were working with FormIt a few minutes ago with the editor. The Dynamo add-in for Revit, it actually, very similar to Dynamo, the Dynamo Studio as well. And then there's the Dynamo Player. The Dynamo Player, for the sake of this discussion, is the easiest Dynamo tool to use. It actually has a couple built-in graphs that you can use. I've downloaded a few that I'll show you here in a second that are not out of the box. You can download the graphs from other people that have created from numerous websites. And like I said, that the Dynamo network is quite expansive. So let me get out of here, and I'm going to, oops. So here I have basically the Autodesk sample Revit model. And I just want to show you a couple of the tools that we can use with the Dynamo Player that's housed directly within Revit. So if I go to my Manage tab, I don't know, this is maybe some people have not even seen this, haven't really played around with it. So over here on my Manage tab, I have Dynamo and the Dynamo Player. Dynamo, if I click on this, it would open up the Dynamo editor. So that's basically the Dynamo add-in that allows you to open up the editor within Dynamo, start to use scripts you already have, develop other scripts. That's kind of harkens back to the, do I have time to learn, all of this type of stuff with Dynamo. If you do, more power to you, but there's also what's called the Dynamo Player. So I'm going to click on this and open this up right now. And this actually has, similar to what FormIt had, it actually has some graphs, some scripts baked into it. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these. And like I said, I had loaded a couple additional ones in here. But I just want to show you a couple things that this is capable of doing. So especially in terms of kind of automating the process, a lot of repetitive tasks. So what if you had to create 50 levels for a high-rise building? A simple a Dynamo script can actually help with that, and there's one that's built in here called Add Levels Above the Selected Level. So it's really as simple. So basically here what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 5 levels in at 10-foot increments. Now again, 5 levels at 10-foot increments is not going to take that long, but if I'm doing something where I have 50 levels, maybe I want to automate that process a little bit faster. So what I can actually do here is I would go over to my edit inputs. It would bring up another dialog box. So here I have the number of levels. I already said I wanted to do 5, and I wanted to do an increment of 10 feet. And what I need to do is I would select. It's prompting me to select the level. So I'm just going to select this roofline level, and then I'm going to hit the play button. And right there, with a click of a button, it has created my 5 additional levels. And I can just pull them over here, just so they align. And there you go. So I've created that quickly. Again, 5 levels is not going to take that long, but any little bit of automation may help us. One other thing. So let's say, for example, I am down here. So I have a very limited drawing set sheet here, but you can see here that my drawing titles are actually in uppercase and lowercase titles. Let's say, for example, I've gotten to I'm into CDs and I have a 150 sheet set, and somebody has now decided they actually want everything to, all of my titles to actually be in all capital letters. That could take a little bit of time to go through 150 sheets and make that change. There's actually a script that I've downloaded and built and loaded into this Dynamo player as well. There's actually, I don't have to edit any inputs for it, but I just want to show you. So keep your eye down here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to this graph right here, update sheet names to uppercase, and I'm just going to click play. And you're going to see that quickly these sheet names all change to uppercase. So you can see how there can be a number of different options that we can use through this Dynamo player. And like I said, you don't have to understand. You don't even have to really have be an expert in editing in the Dynamo editor to be able to use the Dynamo player, but you can still utilize it to help with your workflows. Okay, so we just discussed how a little on how Dynamo can actually be used within Revit, and we touched on it with FormIt as well. Now what we're going to look at is how easy it is to use Insight to create quick energy models of our buildings through the design process. Wouldn't it, I guess the question is, wouldn't it be useful? For some people would find it very useful if there was something that evaluated the benefit of adding insulation, or the impact of installing heftier glazing, or the increased efficiency in rotating your buildings 10 degrees, without having to send it off to consultants, have them run their reports and send it back to you. Here's where Insight comes in. Insight provides Revit users with a fast and intuitive guide to building better performing buildings and running some of that analysis. By simply applying a geographical location and leveraging the automatic energy analytical model in Revit, Insight will create a report, and that's through the use of simulation engines in the cloud. And will produce a range of options to help inform the design process with regards to solar radiation, daylighting, heating, and cooling. If you're not familiar with Insight, Insight is different from most energy modeling in that most force you to perform the analysis at the end of the design process. And when changes, at that point, changes are much more difficult to make, as we all know. Insight works with your existing model at any stage, really, whether it's complete or in progress, whether it's a massing study or you're at the end of CDs. It's okay if the model isn't watertight and has some imperfections. The energy model created by FormIt or Revit will actually provide an accurate representation of your model with minimal effort from the engines. This allows you to integrate energy modeling with your current workflow, which is ultimately what we're trying to supplement here. So you can certainly go as far as specifying thermal properties, space occupancy, lighting, equipment, schedules, all that type of stuff within the model itself, within the element properties to inform the insight analysis, but it is certainly by no means is it necessary. For both FormIt and Revit design environments, the only required setting is the location. This is because Insight will run the range of outcomes for you, so while you can get yourself versed in the advanced settings, you certainly don't need to worry about that. And again, the goal here is to kind of review kind of the tip of the iceberg for some of these tools so that you don't feel like you have to become a master at any one of them. Normal energy modeling analyzes one scenario at a time. Insight actually flips that workflow on its head. The beauty of Insight is that it will show you the report for what is actually modeled, and we'll see that in a second. It's actually called the BIM setting, represented by a triangle. But it will also show you a range of other options with sliders. So here you'll see, this is, I'm going to open up the web browser here shortly, but this is a couple screen grabs from what you're going to see. So basically, let me just go back into Revit here, and I'm going to go to a 3D view. Oops. So under the Analyze tab is where you're going to find the information for Insight. So here is our energy model information. Here is heating, cooling, lighting, and solar. Mainly going to focus on the energy model and the energy optimization, just for the sake of time here. So what you would want to do in order to actually create an energy model is, first, as I mentioned, the only thing you really need to worry about is location. So you would click on your location pin, and you can, when you put it up, you can define where you actually want it to be located. I think there's a couple defaults here in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Boston, Massachusetts. And then once you've selected your location, what you would do is you would use this tool to create the energy model. And I'm going to do this because this doesn't take too long. It only takes a couple seconds to make this happen. And what it's going to do is it's actually going to create a new 3D view in our project browser as a 3D view. Okay, so what we have here, so we can see here, now we have a 3D energy model. I'll zoom in a little bit. You can see how it starts to kind of section out the different elements within the model itself. So at this point, we just have what is, it has turned our Revit model into an energy model just in a 3D view. We still need to basically send it to the engines in the cloud to create the report. So the final step would be, and I'm not going to do this because this will take a little bit longer, but it will generate the energy analysis, and you will get. What you'll do is you'll get an email when it's sent to the cloud, and then you'll get another email with a link to say View Insight once it gets sent back to you, once it's been completed. So let me just open up my browser here, and this is of this model. I've already done it just to give us an idea of have it ready for us to walk through. This is the link. When you click on that link, this is what you get from that report. So let's walk through this a little bit. Insight allows the user to compare the effects of different design scenarios without affecting the actual Revit model. You just saw how we basically just created a new 3D view. So starting at the top here, this is the view of the actual analytical model itself. We have a bunch of tools down here where we can navigate, zoom, section, rotate, any number of things within the 3D model. In the upper left-hand corner here, in the circle, is the resulting energy cost mean. And then down here in this first block, in the second row, this gives us our benchmark comparison. This is what the engines are comparing the model, analyzing the model against. And this would be our Architecture 2030 and our ASHRAE 91 benchmarks for the energy model. Both the energy cost mean and the benchmark comparison will update simultaneously to any of the dashboard changes that we'll look at here in a second. Ultimately, the goal is to get into the green here. The middle block here shows the model history. I made a couple changes just to show what updates may change as we manipulate some changes in here. Now, this is any changes that we make within these sliders, within these options, don't affect the Revit model. It's not a one-to-one relationship, but it will inform us as to what design decisions we can make to make any changes. So if I were to click on one of these options here, so say building orientation. So I mentioned here, this is the BIM marker, the triangle for where the model itself is actually located. So now I have here, like I said, we have a number of different options that we can look at. So I can use this slider, and you can see here as I change the orient. So here, if I were to rotate it 180 degrees, it changes my energy cost mean. If I were to rotate it 135 degrees based on this location, it would change my energy cost mean again. So if I just leave it here and close, you'll see that this updated here and this updated here as well. Moving the slider creates an immediate increase or decrease in the energy cost mean value. So ultimately, when do you run Insight? My answer really would be whenever you have a building design at a critical decision point. It could be during schematic design. You may use it more frequently to decide on the building layout, or once you get into design or construction documents, maybe you run it once or twice to help develop the building envelope a little bit. Okay, so now we've covered how we can, briefly covered how we can use FormIt and Dynamo and Insight in conjunction with Revit. Let's take a look at Navisworks Manage. So, while certainly not limited to this list, the main functions of Navisworks Manage is really to perform design reviews, clash detection between models, and the production of reports based on those clashes. Construction simulation through the Timeliner tool, takeoff quantities from the model or models and exporting to Excel or other costing software to use in that manner. Also, it can even be used for rendering and animations. So here's just a couple screen captures of the clash detection, and I will show you that to you here in a second. So let me just open up Navisworks. So I already have a model uploaded in here for our use. It's another one of the sample files from Autodesk. I have loaded in the architectural model, and I've also loaded in a sample structural model that goes along with it. You can actually see those two models labeled here. So to basically, like I said, to start, what I would do is I would load in an architectural model, and then what I did to add the structural model in is basically what is termed as a pen. So I would add that structural model in here. And again, like I said, I've already done that for us. So through the clash detection window, which can actually be found over here, I already have it turned on. But through the clash detection window, I can actually run clash detection and start to see where there may be some issues with the structural model versus the architectural model. So here you can see here I've selected the architectural as my primary, the structural as my secondary. All I really need to do then at this point is click on Run Test, and very quickly it's going to kind of create a color-coded analysis of all of the different clashes that we have within this model. You'll see here if I expand, if I kind of move down through here, you'll see all of the different clashes. So we have 594 clashes. It's kind of a little bit messy, but what you'll see here is it's color coded, and you can start to see where. So my floor slab is penetrating through this wall. So I can start to see that I can click through each one of these, and it'll jog me throughout the model, and you can very quickly start to look and see all of the different clashes that I have in this model. I'm going to go back up here to one of these, to this very first one. So there's a number of things that I can do with this. Again, you can certainly go down the wormhole with Navisworks Manage. It's a tremendous tool. What I just want to review is a couple, topics that will help, that can be used in your everyday workflow whenever you're receiving models from consultants and the like. So what I can do here is I can actually review this. I can start to mark it up. So I draw something here, and I actually want to put a note in here, say clash, please check. Oops. Say okay, and then I move on to my next one. If I went back to this, I would still be able to see the notes and the markups that I made. I can actually, from here, I can start to go through. If I save the model, I can look at what's new, what's active, what's been reviewed, what's been approved and resolved. I can actually assign. So say, for example, I want somebody in the office to work on this one, address this one specifically. I can actually assign this, and I can basically assign this to Joe Smith in the office, create some notes, click OK, and then once I save, that'll be saved within this Navisworks model that we'd all be sharing and working off of. We can also run a report, which can be useful. So under this tab, we can, I actually have a folder to show you what the output that I already got was. But basically, you can get, use this tab down here to write a report. Let me drag this over, and this is essentially what you get from the report. You get a folder of images for each of the clashes found. So you get an image for all. In this folder, there'd be 594 images for each clash, and you would actually get either a text or an XML file that you can start to decipher some of the information. You will have to know what you're looking for to an extent, but you can start with using the element IDs, and I'll show you again here. So here you can start to look and see the element IDs, and then you can work in conjunction with Revit to start to look at how those need to be modified in conjunction with Revit and with Navisworks and with your consultant. So again, you can start to see, you could send the different images, you can send the text file, start to kind of narrow down and pinpoint some of those clashes that you may be wanting to address specifically. All right, so finally, let's take a look at how you can use the Autodesk Viewer for mobile applications and for presentations. So what we'll do now is kind of go back to a web browser and go to the Autodesk Viewer web page. So let me just pop out of this one more time. And I already have it open. So as long as you have an Autodesk ID, you can use this resource. For the sake of time, I've already actually done this, but what you would want to do is basically just use upload new file to get a project loaded, and then you are able to just drag and drop any file into here, and it uploads for you. But what I want to, oops. Sorry about that. So I'm going to go back into my sample file, and you can see here that there's a multitude of tools at your disposal for marking up and or presenting this model that you can basically load into a web browser and access from any mobile device at this point. So I can start, I can pan and zoom. I can use a couple different section tools, so I can start to see where. Let me just select a different one. Try this one instead. So I can start to cut through my building, cut through different floors. I can actually do walkthroughs with the first person. I can pan around the model. There's a home key where you can basically reset if you've made a whole bunch of changes and the like. And there's this interesting little tool over here called Explode. I've never really quite figured out what anybody would really use it for, but it's kind of interesting and fun to play with. So you can actually it starts to wiggle or get a little upset. Yeah, here, let me go back to home. It's a little finicky, but you can start to, pull all of the elements away from each other in the model, maybe for some type of fancy presentation or something of that nature. And you can actually see over here when I pulled in the model itself, I have my 3D views, and I have all of the sheets that are currently in the project that I can view as well. And here's the markup tool where basically, let's say, I wanted to circle this portion here. I could add some text similar to what we did before, and I can actually save this markup. And you can see here I can scroll through all the different markups in this browser. So if I'm with a client, I can make some markups, and if I want to remember what we've talked about, we can start to save those. And then when I go back and access this same model back at the office or something like that, then I have all that information. I don't have to worry about my notes and the like. I appreciate the time to speak with everybody, and I hope this helps everyone out a little bit starting today.